are good to go, rolling.
Guys, I'll just repeat that first question. Sure. Yeah, so with in terms of the video you put out, the whole industry changing, and like I was saying, it's like we've been feeling that same thing as well, especially in this year with the COVID thing and all of that. So what do you think? Do you think it's just a COVID thing specifically, or that whole change of the industry?
Man, I think I'm hopeful and optimistic that it is exclusively because of COVID. That's my hope, that's for sure. I'm not convinced that's the case. And in that video I posted, that there was one particular argument a lot of people said, and it's really a little more related to politics in that there's a pendulum concept, especially in, any place with a two-party system, that culture and society sort of swing to one side and then give it a decade and they tend to swing back. And you can see that in elections, the parties bounce back and forth. But on a social level, the reason I don't know if we're going to swing back the other way is because, the internet has been around for, 25 years-ish? It's extremely new. And so if you survey, American history and you see this cultural swing happening, that makes sense. That's part of the balance of a two-party system. But the internet doesn't give a shit about that. So we have to balance out, or rather just keep in mind this idea that we're in totally untested waters here. We have never seen what happens when you release these algorithms, which are designed purely to make money for big tech, and just kind of see what happens for 20 years. We're finding out what happens, and the idea that it will just fix itself or make its own correction, I don't know that there's a lot of evidence to say that's what's going to happen. So I hope there is a cultural swing in the other direction where people begin to reject purely entertainment content, and I don't mean to knock entertaining content. People have been seeking entertainment for, hundreds, millions of years, But I don't know. I think it would be bold of anybody to say that they know exactly what's going to happen here. I certainly don't.
To be fair, right? It's people have wanted, like you said, right? People have wanted entertainment for a long time, you get the Luke Hollins and the Matt McGuires, and even before them they were the pioneers for entertaining drum covers, for example, on YouTube. That's been something that's been around for a very long time. At what point did you actually specifically feel that it started affecting, let's say, your teaching aspect of things? Because you're saying it feels like people are kind of shying away from just the straight up pure lessons and wanting the more entertainment. We were discussing now, and we're trying to see whether it's because of COVID or not, but did you only start noticing it now, or have you felt it before COVID even?
I definitely noticed it before. I would say the earliest I had an inkling that something was happening was probably late last year, in 2019. And I suppose I always knew that entertaining content seems to perform better because you can look at, dude, drum covers have always been the highest performing category of drum videos on the internet. I never expected education to eclipse that by any means. I always considered education to be a little bit lower than entertainment in general. So, and maybe that has always been the case, that entertainment has always been number one. And categories like education or informative videos have always been just below that. That may have always been true, but there wasn't a separation. The ratio made a little bit more sense in the past, and now it doesn't make sense at all. It so heavily favors entertainment. So I saw that shift happening, probably 2 or 3 years ago. I would notice those kind of things. The first guy that woke me up to it was really Davey504, who's a huge musician, YouTuber. He's a bass player. And as far as I know, I don't mean to act like I'm some super fan and have watched all his videos, but as far as I know, he entered the online musician sector as an entertainer, and he never really did anything else. And he quickly surpassed education guys that I had been watching for years. And that was several years ago when I saw him sort of climbing the ranks very, very quickly. So, honestly, with him as an example, meme culture, how old is meme culture? Maybe 5 years or so? I think that's when the shift began, when there's the internet has its own inside joke that there is elements of silliness. and playfulness and all of those sort of trends, the concept of trolling, like when that idea came around, messing with people just because it's funny, and this group of viewers knows that it's funny in their own little way. The internet did that maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and what's weird is the drum industry is very often slow. We're behind in a lot of ways. It's a very slow industry. But man, the internet just plowed its way right into the drum industry. And by the internet, I mean those cultural shifts in content styles, It didn't take long, not at all. I think if you were in fitness, you saw all of this 5 years ago. It happened immediately. But again, fitness is a multi-billion-dollar sector. It's very different than drums, which we're normally pretty isolated, but not so much anymore.
Right, that's exactly it, man. Like, that all makes sense. In terms of, within that same line, have you spoken to, like, we wondered that as well. We, like, watched your video and immediately we're like, that kind of summed up to what we've been thinking, as I said earlier.
Sure.
But has there been any other musicians that you've kind of put this out there to and asked, like, how's it going with them? Or specifically the online guys, that'll be interesting to know how many guys are feeling the impact.
Well, it's tough to say because, and I don't want to mention any specific names because I don't want to drag people into a conversation they don't want to have necessarily, but there are some guys who have undoubtedly played the game correctly. I don't consider myself one of them. I've done exactly what I've always done. I haven't really amended my content at all, and that's been to my detriment, which is sort of what that video was about. But there are guys who have amended their content, and I don't fault them for that at all. They have the views to to back it up, But I have also seen those guys slow down. Very recently, too, in like the last 60 days or so, several larger drum YouTube channels who made that entertainment shift a little bit away from education are slowing down. And I think they had a lot of these, what's the word? You stop and you wonder what's going on here. I feel like many other people are in that same position where they wanted to play the game and they did play the game and the views came with playing that game, but all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, like this is far more difficult to monetize. That's a big problem I think a lot of people are having. Like, where does this go? I don't know what, and I don't say this to be like crude or offensive to those people, but if you play the role of the town jester, I don't know what that guy's salary is. I don't know how much people are paying guys like that, or if they're offering a product with a high enough value to ask for money. And if online is exclusively where you're operating, you have to make that decision. Nobody can stay at home and make content for free forever. That's just not how it works. And so I don't know if the entertainment model is completely sustainable. And I think people are trying to figure that out. And I think that's where this slow down thing has happened in recent months. As I think people are starting to step back and wonder about the same concepts that I made that video about, is what is really going on here and where are we going,
What I loved specifically about what you said in the video is you see it here as well, like to build your content or to kind of move up. Like we go through those periods as a drummer as well, where it's just like soaring, where it's happening. Yeah. The views are rolling, you're in the inverted commas algorithm and you think, yeah, I've made it to the algorithm. But there's also that talk about the algorithm where it's like you have to change up your content. And that's why your video that you made was so relevant to us, because we don't and won't go into doing things that, we don't want to do, or kind of goes against what the reason was for creating SA Drum at the end of the day. So what you said there, which I personally respected so much, where you said you're going to hold your ground and just go for it,
Sure.
And I think that's a huge thing, is to just carry on. And I think that's what can sometimes make you feel frustrated, because do you go that route? Or, I mean, we've done little tests like that, and it's the same thing you're saying with the entertainment, and it's so weird. Like, let's say you spend 10 hours on a piece of content. I mean, even designing the mags, you spend so much time, but the next day you can post a funny drum video that you've literally reposted. That's 30 seconds from a guy's iPhone.
Yeah.
And that thing just hits views, and that's where we're sitting back going like, that is crazy. And then what you mentioned kind of made sense to me, of people don't want that complicated thing, you know, with the world being the way it is. So could it be that it's super confusing, you know, like the quantity and the quality thing?
Yeah, I think there are certainly a number of people, a good number of people, who have decided to go down the educational route in response to the weight of the world, right? When life gets chaotic, people seek stability, and for some people, that stability is education. And very selfishly, I would say, you know, those people are on a better route, because I think for your own mental health, for personal growth, for everything that falls under the blanket of self-improvement, you are better off working on your craft than you are being entertained by that industry, right? I mean, of course you are. That's not to fault people that seek entertainment by any means. It's not like I don't watch Netflix. Like, I completely understand that some people's relationship to drums in general is based on entertainment, and that is totally fine. But I do wonder what percentage of those people who have altered their viewing habits and are now seeking entertaining content, if they are doing that and it's rooted in escapism, right? It's rooted in the fact that playing drums is hard and challenging, and they are avoiding difficult things, because that is something I would not recommend to anyone ever, that you avoid hard shit. Yeah. You lean into hard shit, because good things are on the other side of hard work. This is almost universally true.
Right.
And so I would say the same thing to somebody who was planning on getting in shape during lockdowns, and all of a sudden they're just watching fitness videos now. You're missing it. You're missing it, right? If you said you wanted to get in shape and now you're just watching fitness videos, you have missed something here, right? You would be better off seeking out that hard work. And so I don't know that this applies to everybody. It certainly can't apply to everyone. But I do worry. I'm concerned that there are some people who still claim that they want to be professional drummers, that they want to work on their craft and invest in this profession, but they might not see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know that's hard to see for a lot of people right now. And so their response to that is to seek effectively escapism, which mirrors, you know, people that are at home drinking instead of doing other things, or you know what I mean? Like, you got to be careful
Sure.
with that sort of mentality. And so this is where I made that video. It sort of stemmed from this idea, in that for the first time in a decade, I'm confused. I don't know what people are thinking and what's going through their mind. And I'm normally kind of good at that, at assessing a market and sort of figuring out where people's interests are going. And every drum company, every cymbal company does this too. They see where the sound trends are going. It's part of running a business and running a brand. Just knocked my phone off the table. But yeah, I'm confused now, and so I wonder, and I do fear for some people that they are going down a rabbit hole that doesn't serve them. Not that I'm worried for my business necessarily. I'm worried for other people and their interests, you know?
Do you think it could be, I mean, I'm sure you notice it as well, the influx of online lessons with COVID happening? I mean, we know a lot of guys here in SA, for example, it'll be good friends of ours, and they would hate teaching, if that makes sense.
And vocally hate it.
Exactly. Like, seriously hate it. And then next thing, you just see, like, and it was almost like a week period where I'm offering drum lessons now, or I'm offering online lessons now, and it was like one post, didn't happen, never saw them again, you know, in terms of that. As soon as their gigs started picking up again, it was, okay, education back again, I hate education, or teaching. So do you think that could have played a role, like in terms of
possibly diluting the market and maybe drawing people away from it? Maybe people have bad experiences with all of these fly-by-night teachers, and now they're scared of, I don't know, taking up the challenge, like you were saying, with a proper teacher, even.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of different ways you could look at that. I mean, certainly the market has become more saturated in every way. And even without COVID happening, there are more people trying to hop into the online education game all the time. And so I try to look at that as, you know, the more the merrier. You know, who am I to say that we're better off with only myself and like 5 other guys doing it, you know, because there really were. There's only 5 or 6 companies, people that do this full time. I don't think there's any that's not realistic. You know, other people are going to be interested in this business, and as our business models develop, other people will take influence, and this is part of a free market. This is just what happens, right? So I have always expected that there would be a lot of people eventually doing this exact same thing. And even 10 years ago, I felt very lucky to have had the insight to start doing online lessons before there were 100 people doing it, and now there's thousands, right? I think a lot of people probably realized that getting money off of the internet for online drum education is not easy. It is not as simple as making an Instagram post and saying, I offer Skype lessons now. I know for a fact that doesn't mean you book a whole Saturday full of Skype lessons. That's not how that works. And competition is somewhat of an element of it. I dislike when people say that it's not. This is an industry with money in it like any other. Arts are certainly competitive, though it's nice to say that it's not, but that's not the whole story either. It certainly is competitive, and saturation plays a role there. So I don't know. I mean, I undoubtedly saw a big boost in membership signups back in March, but that has certainly stabilized now. And I think what we're dealing with now is the economic downturn, right? I think some people, you know, when they have to stay home from work right away, you still have money in the bank. So the thought of getting a membership to any one of the online education sites, or buying drum books, buying drum DVDs, taking a Skype lesson with this pro drummer you've always wanted to study with, everybody pulled the trigger on that back in March. And I think the reason we're seeing things stabilize in the education industry now, and perhaps we will see them downturn, is because people are rightfully fearful, you know, for their financial stability. I understand some people haven't worked in 6 months and their businesses are closed. And so I think we're starting to see that now. And that makes it even harder for a new person to jump in. You know, if you're just now entering the education game, like I know myself and many of the other guys that are, you know, towards the upper end of the online drum education world, even we don't know what's going on. It is very hard to predict who's coming into our online schools. It's just different now. So I don't know. To guys that are new, it's definitely even harder.
I get you. Yeah, and with saying that, I think it's definitely going to be a turnaround thing. I mean, we've seen it with we run the in-person drum schools here as well. So we've got the SA Drum Academy. And that happened a lot, man. Like even some of our students that were very wealthy people. I mean, that I think that gave me the knock of when I realized how powerful the COVID thing was, because it started relatively slow in SA, and then it just started going. And super, super wealthy students, you know, people that are doing drums, whether it's a hobby or anything like that, they were actually also cutting down. And when that started happening, I was like, man, it is crazy. Like the guy that spends 2,000 Rand on a bottle of wine is basically saying, hey, man, I can't spend this bit of money on drum lessons anymore. It was a real eye-opener. But like you see now, I don't know how hectic it still is there in the States, but we kind of getting there slowly but surely things are starting to come back to normal. So shows are starting to get booked again because Louis and myself tour and stuff as well.
Sure.
And students that had to stop are kind of contacting us again saying, you know what, next month I'm employed again, or next month the business is looking like it's starting to take shape. So it's crazy. Like you said, it's an unpredictable thing, but I think it's also just that waiting game. We've got to just see and wait it out and see what happens.
Sure. And in reality, we should be open-minded and remember that this is not necessarily a drum industry thing. It is the arts.
Yeah.
It's the arts in general. When people are scared, whether they are, you know, scared of the virus itself, or if they're scared of they're scared of spending money unwisely. Whatever the case may be, arts are always the first thing to get cut out. So we can have it, you know, you can blanket this conversation in the drum industry, but it applies to all arts in general. People aren't going to concerts there, and it's not even just music. It's any live event, any air quotes recreational activity, which, let's be honest, for 90-something% of the drum market, it's recreation. You know, when we talk as professionals, we have to remember we're a very small portion of that market. So it's not recreation for us. But to many people, cutting out the arts in their life is predictable. That it makes sense, you know, when you're scared for real life shit, the arts tend to go. And what's even weirder is like arts come second to even sports. You know, I can't tell you how, and you guys have probably experienced this too. How many students have you lost because soccer season started and the kids have to go play a sport? Right? Like the arts come way down the list a lot of times, and that's just a reality of being a music educator. You're not number one in a lot of people's lives, and it's tough when drums are so high on our priority list to accept the fact that they're not for a lot of people that we depend on for our livelihood. But it's just the reality of this industry.
Exactly.
Just bouncing back to this kind of thing where we said, obviously now it's a very uncertain thing. You can't predict anything. We don't know how this is going to turn out. You kind of have to wait and see and play it by ear. But I mean, I know we've been trying all sorts of like this tactic, that tactic, doing this, doing that to see what can coax people into coming back to lessons or entice new people into starting it.
Sure.
And then kind of jumping back further to you kind of sticking to your guns. And you even said you've been doing this for, yes man, many, many years, and you've used the same formula from the get-go practically, and it's worked for you. Are you planning on making any sort of a change? Like, not really changing what you're doing. Are you willing to add anything into what you're offering to see if that can entice people? Are you planning on doing that? Or are you just gonna ride this thing out and see where it goes?
So I have like a hybrid answer to that question. As far as educational content, no. I have my formulas for different types of lessons that I make, and I really don't have any interest in changing that. I've just invested too much time, and the lessons that I make are the lessons I want to make. So making any type of content that I don't like for some reason has never been an option, and it's still not an option. So as far as educational content, there will be no changes at all. But you kind of alluded to like adding some other kind of content in. So I'm doing really two things. I'm starting two podcasts simultaneously. I think the long format open discussion like we're having right now is one of the best ways to convey educational information, right? It's one of the best ways to learn is to hear people expand their ideas over a longer period of time. And I feel like I've owed the drum industry that for a long time. I've talked about doing a drum podcast for a while, and so that'll be the Orlando Drummer Podcast. It'll be probably not exclusively or inherently that much different than many other drum podcasts, but I'm excited to add that format in because I think there is a hunger for that. And I don't say this to insult anybody, but in a world full of like meaningless content, you know, I think people crave substance sometimes, and it's one way to offer substance that I've never really done. So I'm excited to do that. With that said, you know, I'm a highly opinionated person, and it has been frustrating over the years to have to take my opinions and viewpoints and even life lessons, things that I've learned, and have to filter them through the drum industry. That's very difficult to do sometimes. So I'm launching a separate podcast, which is in no way related to drums. And I think a lot of people will be interested in that because they know it's coming from a drummer. It's coming from somebody that they've known for 10 years. So for those who value my opinions or insights, I kind of hope to offer a second platform where they can actually get that information separate from drums. So I think it makes sense. And as far as changes of what I'm doing, those are the two things that I'm doing. Two brand new podcasts.
Incredible. Did you kind of start all of this along with building the whole new website and everything, or are these separate instances? So
yeah, I did know that the new website, which was perfectly timed back in March, April is when that launched. The new website and the apps, when all that came out, I knew that the Orlando Drummer Podcast was going to happen. But the other one is a bit more recent, a little bit more recent. And it's really because, I don't mean to divert away from the drum industry in this conversation necessarily. It's because of the amount of things I want to share that I don't feel comfortable sharing on drum platforms. Because if somebody subscribes to a drum education channel, why on earth would they expect anything else? You know, it only makes sense that they're expecting drum education content. And so as like a branding purist, I really don't want to burden my subscribers and followers on the drum platforms with anything that is not tied into drums. So I think a hard separation was the smartest thing to do there.
With what you're saying, it's awesome. Like, we've also gone a similar route, still keeping in the drum industry, but I think what you said there was certain things where, you know, guys don't really talk about. Like in SA especially, you see, not SA especially, but I mean worldwide, you're seeing a lot of the same stuff. And what we've kind of discovered is no one really talks about, let's say, the music business or the business behind things. Like the conversations that we're having right now, there's not enough discussion about that. So it's so cool, like you doing that sort of thing as well. Like we got this whole SA Drummer Hangouts thing, and it's specifically to touch those gray areas. So it's almost like doing something different in terms of education, but staying your ground.
But still teaching people.
Sure, absolutely. Especially with this more recent video that I posted. By the way, for anybody that doesn't know, it's called Something is Happening. That's all it's called. It's on my YouTube channel. You know, what frustrated me about making that video is that that topic is not at all exclusive to the drum industry. And I have to kind of pretend that it is when I'm talking to 200,000 drummers. You have to, or 10,000, how many viewed it, right? I have to pretend that we're talking about the drum industry in a way, but the ideas there expand far, far beyond the drum industry. So it's almost like if I'm going to really follow up on this topic and expand those ideas, we can't have this filter of drums over the whole thing because we're choosing to talk about a very tiny slice of the whole pie. And so that felt frustrating to me, and it was sort of one of the things that solidified that I need to have a separate outlet to expand on some ideas that are not at all exclusive to drums. Because sometimes, you know, and this is no secret, I have to pretend that the only thing I've been thinking about since from this video to this video is drums. Right? And, you know, having had some of my fans for 10 years now, there's an element of frustration in that I can't always expand my ideas fully because I know that it has to be centered around drums all the time. So I'm excited to be able to branch away from drums in some capacity, you know, because the teacher in me likes teaching everything. I love teaching drums. It's my favorite thing. But I could teach all sorts of stuff. Like I will teach anything to a wall, you know. So I'm excited to just open that up a little bit. It'll be a lot of fun.
I think that's great, man. Because like with those SA Drummer Hangouts we have, it's the same thing. You sometimes go to certain topics where it almost feels weird. You know, talking about them, you know, in a drum studio, 3 drummers together. I mean, we'll go in depth with that stuff when it comes down to, you know, finances. And it's funny, the guest drummers that we have, they'll always put in there and say, but, you know, that's every industry, you know. Yeah. And a lot of those talks, it's so strange when we go on this, I don't know if you've seen any of them, but it goes on to a whole different topic. And it's weird how, like you say, some of those topics within, you know, drum context, when you're sitting in a drum studio with the camera on, talking drum stuff, talking 3 drummers, it's strange how you almost want to hold back on certain things where, you know, I'll sometimes go on the whole having debt thing, and debt is a cause of people being so impatient and everything is needed now. And then that comes all the way out from the topic of how some musicians are impatient. So it's crazy. I get you that.
You have to kind of force it into a drum perspective somehow. Otherwise, the drummers don't listen.
Correct. And drummers have been so isolated in so many ways. And I'll give you a 30,000-foot view example of one way I saw this years and years ago. There were 2 cymbal companies, and one of them launched what I would call an attack ad on the other. And it wasn't brutal. It wasn't like their cymbals suck and they're the worst people in the world. It wasn't that bad. It was just like a little jab, you know? And the drum industry reacted to that as though the company that made that ad was just evil. how could you say such a thing? I mean, deeply offended, deeply offended. And then I see commercials on TV for Verizon and Sprint, or BMW and Mercedes, and they're literally saying their product sucks. It's the worst product in the world, and ours is the best. Leave them, and we'll give you money to come to us. And I'm like, this isn't a new concept that somebody would like throw a little jab at their competitor. But the drum industry is so isolated for some reason that these marketing concepts that have been around for decades and decades are like deeply offensive to drummers. And I don't know what that is. I don't know why our industry is so isolated and so protected from how the rest of the world seems to operate. And in some ways, I like it. I like that we aren't mean to each other how politicians are. I love that hasn't been normalized yet in the drum community. But at the same time, it's odd. It's very odd. It feels like we're in our own little bubble sometimes. And like you said, like even to divert slightly away from drums into finances, which affects everyone and every professional drummer ever. You want to do this for a living, you're going to have to talk finances. For some reason, that feels weird. And so I hope to sort of cross that bridge and make it not as weird. I don't really know how to do that yet, but I'll try, you know.
Well, amazing, man. I'm looking forward to that journey myself. Wow.
Yeah,
It'll be cool to watch.